Hello, welcome to my Growing Outstanding Transplants, and it is springtime here in Michigan, and I am so excited. Can you see it written on my face? Yeah, well anyway, let's move on. Today we're going to be talking about planting and germination. The first thing you need to do is read all the label directions, and if you're growing perennial seeds, for instance, like flowers, there may be some pre-treatments involved. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you read the directions, for instance, when I was going to grow some lilies a number of years ago, it said that the seeds had to be exposed to about 70 degrees for a certain period of time, and then they had to go through a stratification period, which is cool temperatures, usually around 34 degrees for a couple of weeks. And those are the pre-treatments that have to be done if you want good germination. Another thing you're going to have to decide is, how do you want to start your seedlings? You can start them in these little containers like this as a bunch and then transplant later. You may remember when I talked about containers that this is a Wendy's baked potato container, and these are gaillardias, and I started them all here, and they'll have to be transplanted out once they reach a certain size, and they are large enough to transplant out right now. Or you can seed your seeds directly into a flat like this one. And the advantages to putting it in a flat like this one is that you have the seeds already spaced out the way you need them. There's no further need to thin them out. But the disadvantage is you take up more space right away. One of the disadvantages of starting things using a container like this one is you can get carried away, and before you know it, you may have hundreds of seeds or seedlings, and you'll have to find a place to put them. Now, when you're ready to sow your seeds and you've selected your soil and you have your containers, this one happens to be 4 packs. This is a flat, and this is called a cell pack, and there are 4 individual sections in here. And if I want to hold my seedlings longer, I'm going to have a larger individual container. For instance, I'll show you a picture of some others that I can hold seedlings even longer than what I can hold them here. But for instance, with this seed here, this is a muskmelon seed, and the size of this seed is about 1/4 inch across at the largest area. And you should plant your seeds no more than twice their diameter. So since this is a 1/4 inch seed, or roughly 2 centimeters or so, not centimeters, but 2 to 3 millimeters, you want to plant this seed about 1/4 inch down or about 6 millimeters down into the soil. Now, once that's been done, and normally what I do is I just make a depression in the soil, I put the seed in, and when I cover the seed, if I'm using a potting mix, which this happens to be a Miracle Grow potting mix, if I'm using a potting mix for my media or my potting media, then I will cover this over with a little bit of a seed starting mix, which you may remember is a much finer mix. And so I just sprinkle the amount on top of this, and depending on how wet the soil was when I started, I may not even have to wet this. And if it's a little bit dry, you may want to wet it, but I like to pre-wet the other soil nice and wet, so that when I put that lighter soil on top, it will just soak the moisture right up. Otherwise, when you put water on the surface, this light soil will tend to float, and I don't want it to move out of its place. Now, another important thing you should do is label everything. What I like to do is I put the date on. Sometimes if I'm comparing varieties from different companies, then I'll put Burpee or Park or something like that. I'll put the name of the variety, the cultivar name, and I like to use a black permanent marker. If you use ink pen, it won't last very long. And even with the black permanent marker, as soon as you shut your plants out, if you leave them out there too long, even the black permanent marker will fade to the point where you can't tell what it is. So you should check your labels at least once a month, and you may need to write over them just to be sure you don't forget what you have. Now, another really cool thing that you could do to speed up the process of germination is to use a seed starting mat. And this is a seed starting mat right here. And you plug this mat in, and the mat warms up, and you can set the flat right on top of it. That in turn heats up the soil, and you can get faster seed germination. Now right next to me over here, I have a flat of peppers, and peppers notoriously take a long time to germinate. And on the one side, you can see there are more peppers than the other. What I had done is I had set half of the flat on the pad here, and half of the flat was just sitting on my cabinet. And it didn't stay there all the time. I did move these peppers out to the greenhouse, so they were on there for about 2 weeks. And it takes peppers sometimes 3 weeks or more to germinate. And I also had 4 different peppers that I was starting. A row of cayenne, habanero, jalapeno, and sweet red peppers. You can see from the pictures here that the side that was on the heating pad germinated at a higher percentage and faster. So the others I hope will come up, but the longer they're in that soil without coming up, the greater the chance of some pathogen rotting the seed, especially if the soil's too wet. Now another thing I like to do, especially if I'm putting the flat on a heating mat, is I will cover that flat over with the plastic covers that I showed you a little bit earlier. And that will help to keep the warmth in the soil, and it will also help to slow moisture loss. I like to keep the seeding bed moist but not soaking wet. So if it looks a little wet, depending on how much water I put in the beginning, what I will do is open that up a little bit, or I'll take it off for a day or so that I can get some of that moisture to evaporate out. I want it moist, but I don't want it wet. Many times you're not going to use all of the seed that you start. What do we do with it? Well, the best thing to do is keep it in the original package. What I normally do is I will put a little piece of tape on the package, and then I put it in a plastic container, and it needs to be kept cool and dry, and that's the best way to keep your seed. If it's too hot, then the seed viability will go down faster. Another thing that I do is I put them in a container that is rodent proof. Many times I will store my seeds down in the basement. If I don't have too many, I may store them in the bottom of the refrigerator. But if I have a lot of them, which many times I do, I store them in the refrigerator, in the basement, where the temperature stays down into the 60s, and it's a sealed container, so it can stay pretty dry, because the humidity in my basement goes up and down depending on the time of the year. But also, living out in the country, mice can come in, and if I have them just in a bag or something, the mice will find them, and they just love seeds. I did have some get into the garage when I had my seeds out there, and that's not the best place to keep them, because during the summer it gets extremely hot in there and humid, and then during the winter it gets extremely cold, and so it's better to store them in a place like a cool basement or in the refrigerator, and they will last a lot longer. So in our next video, we're going to talk about transplanting, because this group of tomatoes here, these are Juliet's. It's one of my wife's favorites, and these were grown under the T5 fluorescence, and they're just beautiful. But they could have been transplanted earlier than this, but that's what we're going to talk about in our next video. So this is Gary, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. I hope you enjoyed the video.